Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Find a Moment podcast. We are continuing our series on suffering and grief, and if you have not listened to the first episode, we encourage you to go back, and we shared a moment with Taya Johnson, and she shared her story with just a level of raw honesty and vulnerability that we know will encourage you no matter what losses or hardships or dark season you are going through. So we hope you will listen to that. And we are back today with a dear friend, Catherine Fitzgerald. And she just has such wisdom and insight through a life lived of grief and joy and heartache and hope, and just combines them all into this purposeful, contemplative, just amazing life of service and sharing with others. So Jennifer and I welcome Catherine.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you guys.
So good to get to connect with you again. It's been a while since we've gotten to really hang out, but we love time with you. And Catherine, we would just love to hear a little bit of your story, maybe how we are connected, because I think you remember more than our old lady brains.
Well, I mean, I don't even know the year. Have we figured out what year it was? But it was years ago, and I had attended a Sally Clarkson conference with a friend, and they had at the tables, each table host and where they were from, and I saw a local town that I recognized, and that's where Jennifer was sitting. And then, Gretchen, I think you spoke at the event and just shared a little bit of your story. And so that was really encouraging. So I was like, oh, they're in my area. I need to be friends with these ladies. So I think after that, our paths crossed several times with homeschooling and just different areas that we connect through. So it's been years, I think.
Yes, it has been.
Yeah.
Our sweet children have just now grown up, and you have one off in college.
Yes, that's a kind of grief that we could talk about in depth.
Isn't it? Oh my goodness.
I mean, mixed with a lot of joy, but also, just releasing a kid into the wild it's wild.
It is.
It's been wild. So, yeah.
Catherine, one of the things that is part of our past is doing homeschooling together for a little bit, and that was I was looking back through my camera roll before you got here because I was trying to pin a date on that. I think it was 2019, fall of 2019. Definitely. When we started.
Could have been that.
Yes,
it's very
maybe.
Murky.
I feel like photos are now like my time markers. It's like my timeline book. Yes. Like I go back through that. Homeschooled here, did this there. Yes. Because I feel like we met Tara, who also did that group with us. We met her that summer at the barn because Amelia was riding then. But I was trying to put a date on that because I listened to the episode of the podcast that you were on, sharing your story, and it's with a group that you work with.
Yeah, it's a ministry called Nothing is Wasted.
So we definitely want to hear you talk about that. But I was hearing that, and your story with Zach was before, that happened before we started that homeschooling group. Yeah. And so when I listened to you talk about your experience and all the things that you lost, and you also had lost a sense of community, and this is also part of how you have purposed yourself moving out from that, is to help equip people. And I even see this like every day when you share on social media. You're so intentional because I think you feel a sense of responsibility to educate people and to equip people for how to respond to grief. I was realizing part of your story in that episode is that you were also grieving the loss of community. And then we were homeschooling together, and I don't think I was aware of just how much you had been through up until that point. And so like now that makes me kind of look back on that season of doing those things with y'all, with your family. It changes kind of my perception of that. Yeah. Like there was so much more hidden that I didn't know about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think culturally what I've learned is we are not a culture that knows how to engage grief. We're kind of a grief illiterate, if you will. And so what I've seen to be the case, and it's no one's fault, it's just the fact that pain is really uncomfortable. To learn to sit with someone in their pain is... we know neurobiologically things are happening where it's like, I just want to fix you. There's something that happens. I got really into neuroscience through my story, but there's something that happens in the brain when you're actually in front of someone who is grieving or crying, where you literally just want to fix. And what a person needs in that moment most of all is really just witnessing, compassionate witness. And there's some mirroring neurons that can happen and fire when you see someone respond to your pain in a way that's equal to your pain. So, we see that in Jewish culture a lot, like in biblical days. Like there's a thing called sitting Shiva, where people would literally go to the person who just experienced loss, and they just would weep with them. They'd wear sackcloth. There'd be the ashes, that sort of thing. You see that in the book of Job. His friends, they get it right the first 7 days. And they don't say anything. They just are there with him in his grief. And it's not until they start trying to make sense of it that they start to mess up, right? And so you see that whole thing play out in how many chapters was Job, 40-something, where his friends are trying to make sense of his grief. And they're like, oh, maybe you've sinned, maybe you've done this, when in actuality what he needed was just their compassionate witness, them to just sit with him in his grief. And I think a lot of people, that's just it's a source of discomfort. And it makes sense. It's, if we haven't been taught how to engage it, we don't know exactly what to do. And so that's just been my experience of I never want people to feel alone in their pain. And so that's kind of what you see on social media when I'm sharing things. It's a lot of times not a reflection of my own where I am in that moment with grief, but it's just, I know I've felt this before, and this might help somebody else who's feeling that, and naming some of the things that they're feeling. So
that's good. Well, before we get into the details and actually you getting into your story, I'd love for you to just tell us about you and what season of life you're in, and wife, mom, all of the things.
Yeah, so I'm married. My husband, Rick, is currently... he teaches on base, the local military base. He's a pilot, so I always joke that he's like the driver's ed teacher. So he teaches like the classroom portion, and they have this big machine that simulates actually flying this giant helicopter. So he teaches on that. So he's on the ground right now currently, which always gives me a little peace. And I have 3 children. So my oldest, Grace, is away at college in Nashville. So this is her first freshman year. So, we've homeschooled. So our enrollment is down 33%, which is a good thing in homeschooling. So that means we've done something right. So we've launched her, and she's thriving there. And then Asher's 13. He is my scientist. He wants to be a herpetologist. He wants a PhD. So we are like trying to figure out, okay, what can we do to get you on that track? So that's his life's goal. And then my youngest, Mercy, is 11, and she wants to be a pastry chef in France. Okay. So we have had a really fun homeschooling year of learning about France and pastry. And so that's part of her curriculum right now. So we are just enjoying
It's a very tasty
It's been
homeschool year.
Yep, we've learned a lot about croissants, and they are delicious and also really complicated. So that's been our year thus far. So it's just fun. It's definitely a different season. I don't have littles anymore, and the last one, you're like, this is the last of this season. So we're entering almost just teenagers. So yeah.
Wow. Grace is dealing with in Nashville a bit of weather right now.
How are you doing? I'm doing good. I'm learning to regulate myself and just trust that she has all the capability and competence to figure it out. But Nashville's gotten hit pretty bad with the snow and ice, so she's warm and she's safe currently. So that's good. All we can ask for.
Yes, we'll be praying for all of them. It's devastating.
It is.
We are doing our series on grief and suffering, and you've been so articulate in your sharing and just being very open with your story and working towards helping others be equipped to know how to respond. And I love the term that you used, compassionate grief. And even I find myself like when I'm interacting with the things that you share, I find myself just actively learning and realizing I had no idea. I didn't know. And I actually got a message from someone I'm connected with on Instagram in response to one of the things that I had shared. Her message was also saying some of it comes intuitively for her because she's an empath. And I kind of see myself as empathetic, but I don't know that being an empath means that knowing how to respond to grief is just instinctive. Because I do think that I'm an empathetic person, and yet I'm also learning so much right now. So I'm sure there is some kind of intersection there. Maybe being empathetic helps prime you to receive that and how to love and be compassionate when someone's grieving. But I still find myself very much learning with everything that you share. So now would be a good time for you to just tell us about how you encountered grief and how that's kind of formed and shaped who you are.
So I think the biggest encounter I had came in 2018. And my life at that point had kind of reached this place where, like that kind of mountaintop, like things are going good, kids were healthy, we were homeschooling. My husband had just gotten out of the military and had transitioned to, he was an airplane pilot, commercial airlines for a while. And I was running a ministry for military wives, so things were just kind of chugging along kind of thing. My sister, my little sister, at that time she was graduating college, and so our family had gone to right down the road, Topsail, for a celebration with some of her friends, and so our whole family was there. And I've got a really unique family of origin in that all my siblings are adopted. My two brothers are Korean and my sister is Chinese, and they each have just incredible stories that I could share some other time. But so my brother Zach, he's closest to my age. We're 3 years apart. He's 3 years older and was my best friend. He was my person. He embodied, if you've ever heard someone say, like, that person's like Jesus with skin on, that was Zach. He was that kind of person that just had a very unique ability to see people. He was a single guy. He longed to be married, loved kids. He was my kid's favorite uncle. When my husband was gone on deployments, he's coming down on the weekends and caring for them, helping with the yard, all those sorts of things. And, even after he passed away, at his funeral, we just heard all these stories of people that just felt so seen by him, that they, there was a single mom who he worked shift work at a factory that came to work without a coat one day. And Zach was like, "Where's your coat?" And she's like, "Oh, Zach, I can't afford that right now." And so next day he's at Walmart getting her whole family coats, dropping them off just very, very quietly. Like, he wasn't loud with the way he cared for people. Another story was a friend of his. He was at his friend's house and he just looked at the tires of, he was a car guy, looked at the tires of the friend's wife's vehicle, and he's like, "Those tires are going bald. You can't be driving your babies around in that." And she just was like, "Zach, tires are expensive." And so he went home that day and grabbed some tires. He had car guy, so had all this stuff, and came back and just was changing her tires, like didn't even ask. That's just kind of how he was. There's just so many stories of that. We laugh because at the funeral there were probably 15 people that were like, "Hey, I'm Zach's best friend." And he just had that sense of, everyone felt like they were so close to him. So he was our person. He just played such an integral role in our family. And so at my sister's weekend of celebration at the beach, he was lethargic, and more so than normal, coming off shift work quite often. He'd come into family functions, be a little tired, but this was just a little more pronounced. And so he was having some issues just going up and down the beach house stairs and wasn't coming out to be with us as much as he normally would. And it just kind of in passing made this joke, like, "I think I have pulmonary edema." And we were like, "Okay, you need to go to the doctor right away." So all the women were nagging him, and right after that trip, he went straight to the urgent care in his town, about 2 hours away from here. And they listened to his heart and immediately sent him to the ER. And Gretchen, you can, medical-wise, you can help me explain all this. But basically, when they listened, your heart's supposed to make that dub-dub sound, and it was making a swoosh sound. And so they sent him straight to the ER. ER sent him straight to the cardiothoracic unit of that hospital. And so it took several days of testing to kind of figure out what was going on. But doctors came back about 3 days and they said, you have an aortic valve leak. And again, you can explain the medical part, but basically the valve that's supposed to kind of open and shut for blood flow was kind of stuck on open. And so the heart had been overworking for a very long time. And just to the point where it was, supposed to be the size of your fist, it was almost double that size. It had pushed his trachea at about a 45-degree angle. It was a couple centimeters off the chest cavity. And and they also found an aneurysm that they said if that would have burst, it would have been instantaneous. So, we met with doctors and they were very serious. And Zach had come when he had been adopted twice. So his first adoption was when he was a toddler, and he had come to the States from Korea with knowledge that there was a congenital heart defect, and there had been surgery and we're not sure what kind of follow-up care throughout his early childhood. So the doctors were, they were like, this is serious. You came broke from the factory, but we can fix you. So there wasn't even this kind of sense of like, this can go really bad. Like it was more of like the time it's going to take for the healing is going to be quite long. Like we're looking at almost up to a year, 9 months, because it was a very serious open heart surgery. And so, we kind of, that's what we were thinking through of like, okay, how are we going to care for him? What changes do we need to make in our life to rearrange life so that we can care for him? And so that's what we were talking about in the days leading up to the surgery. And so he went into the surgery, and if you've ever been in kind of a surgical waiting room, they have this TV screen. It reminds me of the airport where it's like arrival and departures, and they'll put a number connected to the patient on the board. And so we were the first number on that board that morning. And at about lunchtime, the doctor came out and just looked stressed and just said, we had gotten the valve replaced, but because there had been so much stretching that the tissue just couldn't hold it, and so it collapsed. So he, was like, we're going to keep trying and keep working. And so we're just in that waiting room. We were the first people in there and just watching numbers go on the board and go into surgery and come out and go in and come out. And at about 1 in the morning, the doctor just comes out, and he's just weary. You can tell he's emotional. And he said, we've been in there all day and we just can't get it to hold. And so we've put him on what's called ECMO. He'd been on bypass all day, which was basically doing the work for the heart and the lungs. And his chest cavity was still open. And they just said, we can't, our hospital can't support ECMO for more than 24 hours. So we're going to have to transport him to the local, very prestigious teaching hospital down the road. And so we get there, Zach goes straight there, and then we get there early that next morning, and it just kind of felt like a scene out of a really bad medical show. Like the doctors and the nurses were very young, like looks fresh out of medical school. They're kind of bumbling around. One guy's trying to find his computer. The nurses are trying to figure out what's his case, like when was this last surgery? Like it just feels like there's no adults in the room and nobody really knows what's going on. And that was kind of our experience throughout his time at that hospital. It was very different from the hospital previous. We had just received so much great compassionate care. And my best friend from college actually worked at that hospital. So we had like a medical translator to kind of guide us and tell us like what these things they were saying meant. And so we didn't have that at this hospital. And, from the start, there was just a lot of medical trauma that came out of that experience. But we met with the doctor that was on his case. They had let his body rest for a couple days still with his chest cavity open and just on ECMO. And the doctor that was kind of the head of his case came and said, there's about 6 things that have to happen. His chest has to be closed. We've got to get him off ECMO and just a couple other things that needed to happen. But he said to us, like, we're not going to do all those things at once. It would be too aggressive. And so Zach went into surgery that morning with another doctor, came out. That doctor said, we did all 6 of those things, his body couldn't handle it, and he started to crash. So they ended up having to open his chest cavity back up, put him back on ECMO. We're kind of back at square one again. And even just like trying to get understanding of like what happened from the one doctor to the other doctor, it was met with a lot of resistance. Like, why are you questioning me? Like, this, ECMO is not going to save his life. It was just a very, very difficult, I'd never been in that situation of just major medical stuff. So I just hadn't even understood the importance of knowing how to advocate and knowing how to, ask questions and all those sorts of things. So we ended up, long story short, a lot of other things happened that were very traumatic for our family, but they tried kind of one more, Hail Mary of a surgery that it didn't take. And eventually his system started shutting down. So, and his body went into sepsis, and they just couldn't figure out where the infections were coming from. And he had been through so much at this point physically. And so we ended up having to make end-of-life decisions at that point. So from the start, when he goes to the urgent care to when he passed away on June 14th, it was 2 weeks. So it was just a very, very quick and painful tragedy. Nothing that was on our radar. It wasn't like a cancer diagnosis where we had some expectation around this. It just was very quick. And it was just a lot of trauma in that 2-week period that happened. Of any family that's been in an ICU unit just knows it's the worst kind of hell you'll ever experience on earth. I feel like it's like a roller coaster of hope and despair of just with each little test and that sort of thing. So it just was this very up and down experience. And then on top of that, you guys kind of alluded to it, we were deeply rooted and connected with the local body, and people just didn't know how to engage it, didn't know how to enter into our pain, and not something I fault anyone, but a lot of our friendships, we lost a lot of friendships just because we were kind of left that hospital, and I particularly just spiraled in so many ways, mind, body, and soul. And, we just had friends that just didn't know what to say, what to do. And so rather than trying to do anything or say anything, they just were silent. And so that was very deeply painful, probably after losing Zach, one of the biggest griefs of my life. And then I experienced this spiritual experience that I didn't have words for at the time, but now I know, it's something theologians call a dark night of the soul. So basically, we know that God never leaves us. He's always with us. But there are times in our spiritual journey where it will feel as if he is not there. So God will at times remove his felt sense of presence, not his actual presence, but his felt sense of presence. So you can be doing all the right things, reading your Bible, praying, and just not have a sense that God is with you, that God is there. So it was this convergence of these 3 really hard things at once. And it just sent me just on this journey of healing and trying to figure out, and a lot of, I know the word is used in a lot of ways right now, but a lot of deconstruction in the sense of even just my relationship with God, that there was kind of this transactional belief, which I think a lot of grievers can relate to at times, where, I had been doing all this stuff for God. I'd been serving him faithfully. I'd been, started this ministry to serve and love military families. And there was this unspoken agreement that I will do for you, God, and you will do for me, that I had written. He had never said that, but, and that's part of what I think he started to untangle after that loss of just, there's the grief, and there's the whole healing journey of the grief. And then there's all these other things on top of it that are like, grief is this simplifier. Like it will whittle away all the unimportant very quickly. And it will ask you questions about, why you are the way you are. Like, why have you been operating out of this certain belief system? And it will expose things, and God will use it to bring light to places that he wants to shift and change in you that have nothing to do with the grief or the loss itself, but it's often like this. I liken it to a string that gets pulled, and it feels like there's this unraveling of everything in your life, because it is such a mind, body, soul. God made us integrated beings, and so it makes sense that the process that he brings us on for healing is integrated too, because grief impacts all of them. So probably a really long answer, but hopefully that kind of shares what we walk through as a family. So
when I hear you talk about the dark night of the soul, that sounds like something that could easily be mistaken for depression. And how did you encounter the idea of dark night of the soul, and how did you know that you were, because I feel like even for believers it would be very easy to think, to mistake what's actually happening.
Well, a lot of believers, you've heard that term used, and a lot of times it's referencing depression, and depression can certainly exist alongside that experience of the dark night of the soul, but it doesn't always have to be. Sometimes it's just a spiritual dryness that you experience. And the way I figured out what it was, because I was so about, this was just how I was processing, I needed to diagnose everything and name everything, because I was struggling to why did I lose all these relationships? Well, that actually has a name. It's called secondary losses, and it's a very common experience of anybody who has lost that. Think of the woman who may lose a husband. Well, now she loses her role or position as wife. She may lose something financially. She may experience something similar where friends can't engage. So there's the primary loss, but then there's all these secondary kind of trickle down losses. So that's a thing. There's a name for that. And so as I was trying to figure out, okay, what is happening spiritually? Because it kind of happened, I had up to that point a very connected relationship with God. I heard him very clearly. I could pray, and I could sense exactly what he was saying to me. And it was like a light switch. It just went out. And that was very disorienting for me. And it was happening all around. It started about a week before Zach went in the hospital. And it was like the internet kind of went in and out for a minute, and then it went completely dark. So I was trying to diagnose it, and just had stumbled upon a podcast from one of my favorite teachers and speakers, John Mark Comer. And he actually named it. And then I was like, oh, that's it. And that was almost over a year after I'd lost Zach. So I didn't even have a name for it for almost the first 2 years. But yeah, it can exist with the depression. Back to your question, sorry, it's a long answer. But often it can be something separate too. And it's more of that spiritual experience that you may have had up to that point, where if God feels like gone, or that you can't, like you're praying, or that maybe you're reading scripture. John Mark Comer says it's like ash in your mouth, like just this dryness, and like you're trying to do the things that you think will fix it, and it's just not. Then you may be experiencing that. And there's a lot of things God's trying to do through the dark night. I likened it to, my husband's a pilot, and so with pilots, they learn how to fly one of two ways, and I need him here to explain all this, but one is called visual flight rules. So that's like when the weather's really great, you can look out the window and you see where you're going, and you fly by sight. And then there's another form of flying that's more advanced. It's called instrument flight rules. And that's where you get out there and the weather's not great. You might not be able to see. So you have to trust your instruments, what's inside of the cockpit, in order to fly. And what will happen is, and my husband's lost friends this way, that if you trust your sight, you will get very disoriented. He had a friend in flight school who, two very seasoned pilots together, they thought what they were looking at was the horizon, and they were actually at a tilt and ended up flying into a mountain. And so if you don't trust what's inside of that cockpit, you will get very disoriented, and things can happen. So it felt like this thing that I know now that God was doing. He was taking me out of that, like, okay, you can fly when things are easy to see in front of you, but can you trust the instruments? Can you trust what you know to be true about me when things are very dark and murky and scary, and you can't see what's ahead? And so that's really, I feel like, the journey he took me on spiritually through that dark night of the soul. So
as you were sharing that, it made me think about this kind of like this open-handed, like giving up of control. Is that kind of how you felt? And then how did you navigate? I'm just thinking of like the day-to-day, like is that something you would be willing to share? Like what the day-to-day looked like when you
well, I think
in that season,
right after losing Zach, there's 6 months where it's like a blackout. I don't know. I don't know how I fed my kids. I don't know how we kept homeschooling. I don't know. It just, it was such a fog. And people who have experienced deep loss know that you're in a fog for a very long time. And so even just the time to get my bearings, I don't know. And like I said, we didn't have community that was willing to step into it. So it just, I don't know how we made it through, but I think that's God's grace of just, carrying us through that season. And
did you have days that like you just didn't even get out of bed?
Yeah. And I mean, even then, I think there were moments where the pain was so intense. And, this is what I've found to be true about grief is there are some griefs that, the Lord will heal this side of heaven, this side of eternity. And then there are some that you'll carry with you throughout your entire life. And so there's this phase of grief when it first happens that it's so acute and the pain is so intense. And it's just like, I liken it to a physical wound where it's like you just feel the piercing nature of the pain. And eventually you get to that place where it may throb or it may heal a little bit and you still have some phantom pains or that sort of thing. But at the beginning it was so acute. And I remember just like wanting the pain to stop. And I mean, there were days where I was scared for myself because it's like, it's not that I was like wanting to end my life, but I was wanting to end the pain, Yes. And so I think that's a very common feeling of a lot of people in acute grief where it's like you just want the pain to stop and you start in that dark place, like things can, you can have thoughts of things. And I remember that where there was one day in particular, I cried 24 hours straight and I just was in bed and I think Rick was on a trip for work. And so I'm home alone with my kids and like, I just can't even physically get out of bed. And I just, I think there's a lot of days like that where it was very acute and just very intense.
Gretchen and I were talking before you got here. We were talking about the impact of grief and your ability to care for your children who are also grieving. And I think too, like grief takes on this dynamic thing. Like you start to learn more about yourself and about the people around you when you observe the grief process. You realize the way that I grieve and the things that I need and the things that comfort me are maybe different from what my husband is needing. And so the need for those needs to be met, but seeming to have maybe opposing comforts or with your children, one may want time alone and the other may want to be busy. Like, what was that experience like? You're grieving yourself, but then particularly in mothering your grieving children. What was that like?
Messy. It was so messy. I think, you're right. Like the Enneagram has been, I know people have different views on it, but we
love it.
Okay. It has been,
Give it to us. It has been my next question.
It has been such a helpful tool for our family because I'm an Enneagram 2. So I felt the depth of it all. Yes. And then, my mom's an Enneagram 3. So she was like, what do we need to do? Like just kind of goes into go mode. My husband's a 5, so he was like, I need to do the thing that makes sense to me, which was flying. Like he went flying 2 days after Zach died, and I'm like, how are you doing that? But for him, he had to go do something that made sense. His best friend dying didn't make sense. How to fly a plane made sense. And then my kids. So you had 3 kids at very different developmental stages. I think my oldest literally turned 11 3 days before Zach died. So we had her birthday party. I came home from the hospital. A few friends had driven up, and we had a little pool party. And then Zach passed away 3 days. I was praying, just don't let it be on her birthday. And then I had, my middle kid, I think he would have been probably 5 or 6 at that point, and then my youngest was 4. So the way grief manifested in each of them and the way it continues to manifest, my oldest and my 2 oldest have the most memories with Zach. And they were all 3 very close, but my youngest, like, those memories are starting to fade now. So, even the way it impacted Grace, it was so different. Like, she went very internal. Just struggled to even name. So, I was very honest with my kids. I cried in front of them. I probably didn't do all the right, things that you're supposed to do, but they saw me. They saw me at the bottom of it, and we talked very openly and honestly as a family about our pain. We still talk about it, when things come up. Yeah, we didn't have a roadmap for how to even engage it or how to do it. And even just letting my kids have their own healing journeys. Like, my oldest, she went very internal. She was this very bubbly, outgoing kid, and it shifted her. And she went very internal for a long time. And then music is what drew her out and brought language to things. Like, she started listening to certain artists that talked a lot about grief, and so that's what God used on her journey to bring her out. And my middle kid, Asher, he's very empathetic, and I think an empath in a lot of ways, but he's really good at being okay with people's pain. We had a goldfish die, and I hear this wailing from upstairs, and I rush down. I'm like, what's happening? And I see my youngest on the bed crying, and I think somebody said, like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just a goldfish. And then I hear him say, no, she's grieving, and we can be honest and open with her grief. Like, it was just like he had learned how to process and how to let people be and experience what they were experiencing. And so, it's a journey I think we're still on, and we're still trying to figure out, and it still impacts all of us to this day. And I think grief, you learn that when it starts, it's this really heavy weight that is crushing. And eventually it's like you learn to metabolize it, you learn to carry it, that, I don't have to solve it or fix it or make it go away, but that this is now something that's going to companion me. At time, it's going to want attention and want me to engage with it, and so I do in those moments, and especially I think as you go on, every new joy has grief with it because Zach's not there. So my sister got married last year, and my daughter graduated high school, and like all these things were like he should be there. And so I think you grieve anew every single time, and it's just learning to allow it and not to fight against it. I think as a culture, we're so uncomfortable with grief that we will often try to push it down, repress it, ignore it, and it will come out. And I think that's what we see a lot with people, that so much of what we see nowadays is grief underlying it. But if you don't attend to it, if you don't give it that compassionate witness that it needs, it's going to try to find its way out, and usually it's in unhealthy ways that are just coping to try to keep it at bay. So,
Catherine, you are so articulate in just kind of reflecting and sharing, and all just so much of this is so deeply personal, and you have allowed the Lord to equip you through words and just your thoughts and your time, just continuing to invest in your walk with the Lord, the way He's investing in you so that you can invest in the world. And that is going to be what we would like for our listeners to come back for in our next episode, continuation of this conversation where you share about your healing journey that also involves moving outward into the world through what I kind of view as grief education. That's very much what I have experienced, just encountering the things that you've shared on social media. And we'd love to hear about the podcast episode that you shared your story on with the podcast that you work for. So for our listeners, thank you for finding a moment with Catherine today. And we would love for you to join us back next week for part 2.